Everybody for joining us tonight. This is the Academic Affairs Committee meeting of the District 2 Community Education Council, and my name is Allison Bowen. I co-chair the committee along with Daniela Egeroff, and we are joined tonight, just looking around to see who I see from our committee, by Sam Lowe, who is on our committee, and we should also be joined by Ethan Kwok, who is the student member of our committee, and D2 CEC President Craig Slutskin. And I think that wraps it up for the committee who's on tonight. We're also going to be joined later by Superintendent Kelly McGuire, and we have our invited guest on, Brandon Wright, who you'll hear from shortly. So the plan for the meeting tonight, on a quick run of show, is that we're going to talk about the Math Path Initiative to bring more rigorous math instruction to our elementary and middle schools in District 2. Then we're going to talk about the Regents Geometry Pilot Program at Lab Middle School this year, the 25-26 school year, and the opportunity that we have to expand that program to other middle schools in the district for next year. Then we'll talk about what you can do as a parent if this is of interest to you for the school your child attends now or will be attending in the fall. And we will hear from our invited guest, Brandon Wright, and then open it up to questions, first from the committee and then to the public. And it looks like Tam Reed, who is the final member of our Academic Affairs Committee, has joined the call.
Hi, everybody.
So thank you all. We plan to wrap it up by 8 o'clock. So I will jump right in and start talking about the Math Path Initiative. Some of you may be familiar with Resolution 252, which was passed during the last term of the Community Education Council, which called for advanced academic instructions, particularly accelerated math instruction in our elementary and middle schools. I think many of you know that there is limited or no options for accelerated math if your child is not in one of our gifted and talented programs. And as a result, a lot of families send their kids for outside math instruction outside the New York City public schools to Kumon or Mathnasium or the Russian School of Math or private tutors. And this is creating a real equity gap based on families' ability to pay for and afford these programs. So when students don't have access to this advanced curriculum in elementary school and middle school, they actually cannot access the highest level of math offered at many of our New York City public schools. If you don't enter high school having algebra and geometry, you cannot reach, because math is sequential, calculus, BC, linear algebra, and some of the more advanced courses that are now table stakes if people want to go to Research One universities and be an engineering or STEM major. And what happens is our public school students aren't prepared, but kids coming in who are taking outside math are. And so it's creating this real equity gap, and an equity gap in knowledge as well, because middle school parents, if they're not offered these courses, don't know that they should be trying to find them for their students to reach these higher level of math courses in high school. So our goal with the math path is to provide some of that foundation starting in upper elementary school grades and through middle school so that students who are ready have access to advanced and accelerated math. As part of that, we have the Geometry Pilot Program, which I'm going to speak briefly about now. And that gives you the context for why this is so important for middle schools. Okay. So this year, Lab Middle School offered Regents level geometry to a group of 7th and 8th graders, in addition to the pre-algebra that 7th graders are taking and the Regents Algebra 1 that 8th graders are taking. You may know that Algebra 1 is offered now at all District 2 middle schools. So Principal Adams partnered with the New York City Public Schools iLearn platform, which is a virtual platform for virtual learning. So this is a Zoom class, a Zoom geometry class that's taking place at 0 period, which means before school begins. For the iLearn platform, which many of you probably are not familiar with, this is all certified New York City teachers. It has many different classes. It be sometimes used for credit recovery for kids who have to make up a class, but it can also be used for acceleration, like in this case. And I really am going to applaud Principal Adams here for setting this up because she's given students a great opportunity because there's a low barrier for children right now who are trying this class. It was offered, and if children's not working for them, they actually have an opportunity to drop the class. So they can try it out, see if it's right for them without the pressure of committing to it. And the other thing for seventh graders, if any of you have seventh graders or are thinking about what the rubric looks like for being a tier 1 student for admissions to high school, the higher of the two math grades for seventh graders count toward that tier 1 GPA or tier 2 GPA for high school admissions. I think that's important to know. And there's been a lot of benefits here in terms of getting credit for passing the Regents. Eighth graders get credit for the Regents test if they take it, as well as the class, and seventh graders get credit for the Regents exam, but not the class. So that's an interesting distinction. But then by having these, they get to access higher math as soon as they get into high school. Principal Adams has been very positive on the pilot program. And she and Superintendent McGuire met with the other principals of middle schools in District 2 on March 17th to discuss the program and gauge interest of other principals in having this program at their school next year. For me, this seems to be kind of a no-brainer to offer for students in the screen programs at our 4 zoned middle schools who are already selected based on their academic performance at the end of high school. So that's Wagner, Baruch, Sun Yat-sen, and Morton Street. I also think there may be interest from parents whose children are attending Salk or Eastside Middle, previously zoned schools, or other schools in the district. And because this is a remote class, what we'd really like to see is if some of the bigger schools like a Baruch or a Wagner offer this, with the minimum number of students per class, that they can open it up. So if there's only a handful of kids at Morton Street, or there's kids at 276 or 289, but there's only a few in those schools, that they could actually virtually join a class that was put together by one of the larger schools in order to have as many students as possible have access to this. So in terms of next steps as parents, if you're interested in seeing a program like this at your school, it would be to talk to your principal. They've all heard that this is an option. So between now and the next meeting of the superintendent and the principals, knock on their door, send an email, pick up the phone, talk to them in the yard. Also reach out to your school leadership team or your PA, depending on how involved different people are getting in the academic affairs of the school. And of course, when Kelly gets on, please ask him questions as well. So what I'd like to do next is I would like to introduce our speaker. And then after we hear from our speaker, we will open it up to the discussion. Brandon Wright is the editorial director of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, which promotes educational excellence for students across the United States. Education for High Achievers is one of the focal points of his think tank. And Brandon's role includes being the editor of Advance, Fordham's Substack that focuses on this research. He's the author of multiple books on education, including Failing Our Brightest Kids, The Global Challenge of Educating High Ability Students. So I'd like to thank you for joining us and turn it over to Daniela.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Brandon, for joining us. And thank you for all the parents who are here. So the first question that I want to ask, Brandon, is can you share some of the recent research on the importance of accelerated classes in middle school, particularly in math, that you have found, given all the work that you have done in this area?
Sure. And hi, good to be here. Yeah, I've been in education policy for a long time, and often, for any given intervention, when you talk about the evidence behind it, it can be a little complicated because, the evidence is, you know, partial or, conflicting. What's interesting about this question is this isn't one of those areas. The evidence here is extremely clear, like weirdly clear. Um, and the evidence shows that the type of intervention that you're talking about here is essentially a form of acceleration and grouping by achievement. And those two interventions have a ton of evidence that demonstrate how much they benefit kids who are accelerated and grouped by achievement. But what's interesting about the evidence that shows those benefits is that that same evidence shows that these interventions do not harm their peers who aren't accelerated and don't harm their peers who aren't grouped by achievement with these sort of accelerated kids. It also finds that the type of student who gets the greatest benefit from these interventions are underserved kids. Um, so to sort of put that in one sentence, acceleration and grouping by achievement have overwhelming evidence for the benefits that they have to participating students' achievement. These interventions do not harm the peers who aren't giving these interventions because they aren't ready for them yet. Um, and the students who benefit the most tend to be the underserved kids that those of us who talk about equity care the most about. So Allison said this was a no-brainer, I think, and I think that's exactly spot on. And I wouldn't say that about a lot of education policies. But again, on this particular issue, the evidence is again overwhelmingly clear that there's really no reason not to do this.
Thank you. And I know you have written a lot about that on your Substack Advance, and so I have learned a lot from your Substack, and so I would highly encourage any other parent who wants to learn more to go to his Substack Advance because you can find a lot of the research that he's referring here. Um, One other question. You work with recommending policies for districts. So what are your recommendations in terms of school districts to implement these advanced or accelerated math options for middle schoolers? If you have like three or four things that you tell districts, can you please share
Yeah.
with us?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the sort of best practices go about this in a few ways. One is to use a test that all students already take, right? So you aren't adding any new exam, you aren't adding any new tests. We call this universal screening. This means that no parents have to opt in. Nobody really has an advantage. Um, and it tends to reduce the bias as much as possible that can exist in these programs, admittedly. Another way to go about it, another best practice is to subscribe to what we call local norms, right? So you would do this sort of by school as opposed to, by school district. You take a place like Manhattan or something, and if tried to group by test score and you tried to source from everywhere, right? And you took really affluent schools and really, you know, and then sourced the same programs from, Title I schools and things like that. What you would find is that the odds would be unfairly stacked against the underserved kids that, again, we're trying to benefit when we talk about equity. So instead, you can create these programs in individual schools, and that, again, can reduce the bias and the exclusion that some of these programs have historically due to poor design had when it comes to underserved children. Another way to go about it, and this kind of builds off of the universal screening aspect of it, is to do automatic enrollment. So essentially, you would say, for example, and there's different ways that districts and schools can do this, but right, like at test score X, every kid above that in say math, gets put into this accelerated course, and to not take that course, you actually have to opt out as opposed to opting in. Um, Again, what we find is that that tends to, again, reduce the bias and the exclusion that some of these programs, again, due to poor design, have historically had for underserved kids. So, right, if you combine sort of those three things, I guess I would add two more. There's also evidence that sort of high quality curriculum in these programs really sort of maximizes the benefits of these programs. There can be versions of these, right, where you just, group students by achievement, but then you aren't really doing anything different for them. And that's a waste and doesn't really benefit anyone. Uh, and then schools and districts should really hold these programs accountable for doing all of these things that I just described, right? So they shouldn't just be like, rules that aren't implemented well and aren't and for which, schools and districts aren't held accountable. So essentially, I guess that's what, five, six things. Um, when programs are designed in these ways and do these things, uh, that's when you really see the benefit that I talked about when I talked about the evidence backing for these interventions.
Great, thank you. Um, what are some of the benefits or reasons that you see for implementing these advanced classes? And you can just talk about like the individual student level, but also like in terms of a city or a school district.
Sure, yeah. So earlier, right, I kind of talked about, quantitative reasons for doing these things. I think there are also legitimate qualitative reasons for doing them. One, I think, is just simple fairness. I think we owe it to every child in our country to do what we can to maximize their achievement in school. And I think that's especially true for the underserved kids that I mentioned so many times. A number of kids who would participate in these classes and programs if they existed are these underserved kids. And they're the same kids who have less ability to sort of go outside the school district and get this sort of instruction anyway, which Allison talked about earlier. These students who are most able to do that are, the sort of privileged, affluent students with means. So, in a sense, by precluding programs like this from being available to students in your district, you were being, deeply unfair to a number of students, including a number of underserved students, and they're the ones you're harming the most because the affluent, sort of privileged families find a way to get around this anyway. Um, the other argument that some people care about is that when you maximize the education of as many kids as possible in a school district or a state or a country, right? You're sort of you're doing your best to feed and facilitate sort of a healthy economy and a competitive country in a very, competitive global environment. This argument won't resonate with everyone, but for those that it does, I think it is a legitimate point, right? When you look at a number of our competitor countries, uh, China, for example, they are doing everything they can in their urban centers to absolutely maximize the achievement of their high achieving kids. Um, and uh, and yeah, so again, for whom an argument like this would resonate, I think that's another sort of qualitative argument for why these programs can be important.
Yeah. As a parent who has paid for the outside math acceleration for my kids, it is extremely expensive in Manhattan, and it keeps growing. Like I think the most famous one is Russian School of Math, and they keep growing because there's so much appetite for this. But as you said, unfortunately, it's only people who have the resources who then can provide this if it's not being provided by the public schools. Okay, last question that I have is, um, we often hear that grouping students, by readiness level into single classrooms works as well as advanced programs that group um, putting all the students, in one class by then it works as well as getting students by level in math. Can you speak to that specifically? Because I think might be one of the things that are more difficult. And I actually talked to a parent who was like, I don't want this because I don't think my kid's going to be at the top class. And I shared that, my son, when he went to middle school, that does that. And he was not at the top math class, but he learned so much more because there was that differentiation, right? He was getting exactly the math at the level that he needed. So that's my personal experience. But if you probably have research and data to share about that.
Sure. Yeah. This is something that I've looked at sort of over my career here too. And essentially, no high quality research shows that this sort of, fully heterogeneous differentiation can work at scale for the, very wide range of achievement that's present in sort of the average American classroom. And a number of studies show that it doesn't work. There's sort of two reasons that suggest why it doesn't work. I mentioned that the average American classroom can have a wide range of achievement. And when I say wide, I mean very, very wide. A study in 2022, for example, found that the average classroom has a span between 3 and 7 grade levels in it. So imagine tasking a teacher with trying to do justice to instructing kids across 3 to 7 grade levels in math. Um, Extremely, extremely hard. Some of our best teachers, I'm sure, can do it, but it's very, very hard. And because it's so hard, that's why these uh, these analyses show that it doesn't work at scale. The other reason why it tends to not work is the research shows that teachers essentially don't do it, largely, presumably, because it's so hard. Like um, another study out of the University of Virginia tried to measure the effects of this sort of heterogeneous differentiation, and they concluded that they couldn't study the effects because not enough teachers were actually doing it. So it's very hard. The range of achievement in an average classroom is extremely wide, and presumably because of that, teachers just don't do it. So because of these things, although differentiation in any given class is sort of an important skill for teachers to do, and it's sort of an important element in any sort of continuum of interventions that any school or district should have for students, when relied on by itself, when relied on in a way that precludes the sort of acceleration and achievement grouping that we've already talked about, it just doesn't work, is what the research shows.
And one follow-up question, when you say that like the teachers, it's almost impossible to differentiate 7 grade levels, they tend, what I've read that teachers tend then to teach to the average student, and then, the students who might need more background and attention, or the ones who are ahead, who are bored, are the ones who actually then kind of, don't have that education with what they need, right? It's usually then just the average student that is um, getting like the instruction that the teachers are providing when you have so much diversity in the level.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. It would be either sort of the average or the average and sort of the lower achieving kids at the time, because you mentioned right that they need a lot more help at the moment, and they deserve a lot of help, and so like you mentioned, a lot of the higher achieving kids, again, a subset of which are underserved kids, are left essentially neglected in these classrooms, and that's a very big problem. And that's another reason why districts and schools should offer these accelerated achievement grouped opportunities for these kids who are ready for them at the time.
Thank you. Allison, back to you now for the Q&A.
Thanks. Okay, that's terrific. What I'd like to do is I'd like to ask any of our committee members who are on the call tonight. And Sam, you have your camera on. Why don't I start with you to see if you have any questions regarding the geometry program, or for Brandon about the research that's being done at the Fordham Institute.
Sure. Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for being a guest on the call today, Brandon, and for the information you've shared. Um, so you talked about how um, having this math path would actually help underserved communities and help identify, um, you know, high achieving students through, the different means of universal opt-in testing. Um, is is there a way that, I mean, so is it costlier to go this path um, to implement, like with illustrative math, the curriculum, is it adaptable to work in this way? And would it be costly if we don't actually adopt it? So, in terms of if families choose to leave the system, I mean, does your have you looked into this sort of thing? Because, one of the concerns is whether or not the academic rigor is being met for a lot of the families, and some of the some of the data that I came across recently seems to suggest families have been leaving the system. So is there like a cost to not implementing?
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer that with like in the context of the specific program that you're talking about in your specific district. Very hard. So I wouldn't pretend to know the answer to that specifically. I can speak to, I guess, some generalities. I think programs like this can be very cost effective if done in the way that I described, right? With the universal screening, the idea is to use a test that already exists, so you aren't adding new testing, so you aren't adding really any new money there. If you use the local norms that I talked about, placing these programs in individual schools and sourcing them from those schools, you aren't adding new buildings. You don't really have to add new teachers. You might add some professional development and stuff like that. But and you aren't losing students from that school, right? I don't know exactly how schools are funded in the city, but in most places in the country, right, it's per pupil, right? So done in done in these ways, I don't think these interventions have to be costly. The sort of flip side of that, which it seemed like you got at some, is if families are leaving the system because these sorts of opportunities aren't provided, then in a sense, if that's true, and again, I don't know the specifics of this case, if families are leaving because the school isn't providing the opportunities that parents believe that their students deserve and need, then the schools would be losing that per pupil funding, but they wouldn't be losing teachers or buildings or anything else. So they would essentially, seems like, um, be keeping sort of the cost equal, but then losing the revenue. So in a sense, not doing it, I guess, in that sense could be costly. But again, I'm very much speaking in generalities here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sam, just to follow up on one of the things that you said, I think that's important is District 2 has gone in their middle schools to implementing the iReady screener across schools. Schools had the option before to use a bunch of different screeners to track student progress. But more recently, they've standardized that across the district. So that's a very systematic tool that can be used for implementing a program like this. In the past, it's been grades to get into the screen program. The iReady program could be layered onto that as a way to do just what Brandon's talking about. Is like anyone who meets the criteria, give them an option to get into a more advanced program. I want to ask and see if anyone else on the committee has a question, Rebecca, before I turn to you. So Craig or Tam, do you have anything
Yeah,
that you would
sorry.
like?
I do. I had to jump to my phone. I'm so sorry. I'm
Thanks, Tam.
like, there's lots of kids in my house. So no, thank you for this. I'm curious to have more conversation about District Two's math path and the nuts and bolts of that. I think I would like to see how that is being rolled out and really take a look at the pilot and see how lab is, how they've how they've done it. And I think that that is a conversation that this committee could get deeper into instead of kind of the nuts and bolts of just, differentiation and ability grouping and all of that, which is a wider discussion. But with the map, with the iReady, sorry, I know some middle schools still use map assessments and then they use iReady. There's a lot of problems with that screener. Um, Lots of problems with that screener. So kids are just speeding through it and they're just filling out whatever. And it's not indicative of like where they actually stand. I think I just worked with a student that got a fifth grade proficiency and he's in ninth grade and is like a stellar math student. So it's kind of all over the place. I'd be interested to see how we're deciding who gets what and where they go and all the things. But to our speaker, thank you for coming. I'm interested in and sort of where you see the cutoff and like how you make this more accessible to more kids. I know that, high achieving can change at any second. And I think like just the idea of high achieving versus low achieving is kind of setting up this conversation, at least for me, to be pretty divisive. So how would we, make this accessible to the B student, to the C student that will be a B student? How do you envision that happening?
Sure. Yeah. So the way that I personally sort of and professionally view what I call advanced education, I don't call it gifted. And I don't call it gifted because when I talk about these things, I'm personally not talking about anything inherent in any child. I'm simply talking about, right, at any given time, who is most or who is prepared for whatever intervention we're talking about. To your question, how to make it as accessible as possible, I think one of those is to not make the cutoff sort of, particularly high. Um, some research shows that when students are actually challenged, that a lot more students are sort of, capable of rising to that challenge, than systems have assumed in the past. So that's right, like at this moment in time. But I think a better and more complete answer to your question, is to really think about K-12 education in your district with that sort of same mindset, right? To from a very early age, challenge students a lot more than districts are and have historically. What we call that in sort of advanced education is front loading. So, starting in kindergarten, starting very early on, challenging as many kids as possible and sort of accelerating everyone, in those early grades. Um, and what we find when you do that is, by the time that you're placing kids into accelerated achievement grouped classes, like we're talking about here, a lot more students are prepared to to succeed in them. Uh, Another way that we do this is a couple of the sort of design elements that I talked about earlier, right? The local norm part is a really big part of it, right? Because schools, at least in most places, tend to be grouped geographically, and there's a lot of, socioeconomic homogeneity in, various geographic areas. When you create these programs in individual schools, uh, you make them much more inclusive when you look at them as a whole across the district than if you're setting cutoffs based on, district-wide or, city-wide averages, right? So that's another way. Um, I'm not a psychometrician, so I don't know about your complaints about the screeners. Um, but again, if you are taking a test that people are already being administered and you're creating again as inclusive cutoffs as you possibly can um, for these opportunities using those assessments, then again, the research shows that you end up sort of diversifying these programs much better. They do much better when you're looking at them from an equity standpoint. Um, so those are ways that I think any program should go about it, if I were designing it.
Thank you. I see Ethan's on. Ethan, do you have any questions about the program or anything that you want to share from your experience in the school system?
Sorry, not so far. Right now I'm outside, so I apologize if I'm not being able to interact as much or give my opinion as much today.
Sounds good. Okay, Craig, would you like to add anything to the discussion?
Yeah, and I'll try to make it quick because I think there are some members of the public that want to speak as well. I
Thanks.
guess I have two questions, one for you and one for Brandon. So for you, do you see the lab program or any of these programs morphing or evolving into where that class is in the regular day? Because there's advantages to it being outside of the day. You can go out of it if you want to go out of it. If you don't think it's something you want to do anymore, it's very easy to do that. At the same time, who wants to take a class at 7 whatever in the morning? So there's balances, there's challenges or pluses and minuses on both. So where do you see that going? And then my question for Brandon is, where do you see the trends nationally? Because I think a few years ago we started going on the other way, where we went away from this type of tracking or acceleration groups. But are you seeing the pendulum starting to swing back nationally, as a, in either the larger cities or the smaller cities? How do you see that?
Sure, I'll jump in first. I think it would be ideal if it were during the school day, but that would require a more systemic shift to move up the math curriculum so that you were doing essentially 6th and 7th grade math. So the 2 years compressed into 1 year in 6th grade, and then either geometry in 7th and algebra 1 in 8th, or vice versa. And I would like to see it eventually go that way, but that's a bigger lift for principals and for how they're running their schools than for doing something right now as a bolt-on pilot to see that it's successful and then more fitting into that down the road.
Thank you.
Hey, Greg. Yeah, you're exactly right that, I'd say, 5, 6 years ago, when our country, really started reckoning with, racial injustice, that one of the things that changed was attitudes towards these programs, largely because of, some of the historical exclusion of, so many underserved kids. I feel like I've talked about that some in my answers. So you saw in places like Boston and New York and Chicago, San Francisco, calls to get rid of these programs and calls that ended up being successful at the time. More recently, I think you've seen attitudes soften or right nuance sort of start to enter the conversation, and seems like there's starting to be um, places that are a little more welcoming to versions of what we're talking about. To be clear, they didn't go away everywhere. The places that I talked about are examples, but it's not like, advanced education disappeared. But some of the recent success that some people in my field have had is with things like automatic enrollment, which I talked about earlier, right? Because it's just this it's this very sort of no-brainer intervention where again you're taking a test that you already have, and anybody that is prepared for, an accelerated opportunity is automatically enrolled in that. A lot of the places that do that tend to, have the cutoff be very inclusive, like I talked about earlier to, I believe you said her name was Tam. Um, so yeah, I think attitudes are softening towards the idea of these interventions. I think the research that I described is a large part of it. That when done well, these actually benefit the very kids that we're trying to help when we talk about equity. Um, so yeah, I think the environment is improving for things like this, and I think that's a good thing.
Great, thank you. And now I'd like to open it up to some questions. Rebecca, you had your hand up earlier in terms of questions for either myself or for Brandon.
Yeah, thank you. So Allison, I think these are going to all be for you. I was writing them down as you were going, and I have a few questions about the math path. And I just wanted to say that I have a fifth grader who needs to take geometry in middle school. So I'm heavily invested in these answers, and it's going to determine whether or not we stay in D2 for middle school. So my questions are, how is the iReady program paid for? Is that through PTA funds or through the school? Like, is there an extra cost and how is that covered? That's my first question.
Okay. And I think you're actually asking about the iLearn program.
iLearn, sorry, yes.
Program.
Yeah.
As opposed to the iReady, which is screener, a lot of
Yeah.
eyes. And I also realized that as you were asking your question, Superintendent McGuire joined us on the call. So thank you for joining us, Superintendent. We've just opened up the conversation to the parents on the call to talk more about the geometry program. The iLearn program is actually paid for by the school itself. So the middle school that is doing this program would have to incorporate it into their budget. But my understanding, it's a very budget-friendly program. And I don't know if Superintendent, you could say anything further about the budget for incorporating this into a new middle school.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and my apologies. I'm just trying to get home and get settled in. But yes, the cost is really minimal. I think less than $3,000 to run the program, and that's one of the things that's made it attractive in the district.
Right, and that's $3,000 overall as opposed to per student. So that
yes,
is
right, yeah.
That's a low number if you think that there are 20 kids enrolled and could be, I think, up to 30 in each classroom because it's virtual.
Do you mind if I ask if you like one more question? Is that
Sure,
okay?
keep going.
Thank you. So just because I think D2 doesn't currently have any geometry classes offered during the day, where are these students going to take the geometry regents exam?
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Liz does. Liz, do you know the answer?
Hi, I'm Liz Storm. My child is participating in this program. Lab Middle School will offer the geometry regents for those students.
Great. And I actually have one more. It's okay. If the school so first, and I also want to just say that parents who are extremely interested, students who are extremely interested, are going to take that 7 a.m. class. Like, that isn't going to be an issue for people who really want this. So say a middle school isn't going to be offering it, isn't going to be paying the $3,000 to offer the program for their kids. Is there a way for interested students to kind of hop on board the Lab Middle School program and do that virtual class and then go to lab to take the regents at the end of the year? Like, would that be a possibility? Or if your school doesn't offer it, you're just stuck?
I think that's a great question. I think that goes back to the conversation and superintendent that we were having earlier about the fact that it would be great even if some of these larger schools like a Wagner or Baruch that had enough students to fill a class or two classes or more classes, then we could open up the spots in those classes to students at other schools to join who maybe don't have 18 students to do a class. We're actually doing that right now. There's one student who's joined the lab class who is not at lab who joins virtually. The students at lab have the opportunity to either get up, start at 7:15 in their house, and then use that 30-minute window if they're close enough to school to get from home to school, or they go in and they do it in a group setting. Their teacher's still on Zoom, but they do it in a group setting that's proctored by someone at the school, and they have an opportunity to be together in that class. So Kelly, would you like to speak at all about your thoughts on how this gets rolled out?
Yeah, thanks. We have introduced the idea to the rest of the District 2 middle school leaders, and I think that we can foresee a couple of classes, two or three, I think, rolling out next year across the district in addition to the program that's going to continue at Lab. The school start times are close enough so that they can coordinate schedules, and so I and there's enough interest and enough just looking at kind of some preliminary data around student profiles to be able to support a couple of additional classes if the school ends up getting enough student applicants for the program. So yeah, I think we'll be in good shape to be able to continue that. Administering the regents is like the least of the challenges. Probably the biggest challenge for the middle schoolers is getting up in the morning and doing math right away. But as you point out, this is a group of kids who are really excited about this, and their families are excited about this. But the regents, the geometry regions, can be administered in any school in accordance with the state schedule. So yeah, I foresee. I think that that we will probably not have programs that are just run at one school, that we will have programs that pull kids from a few different schools.
Okay. And Chen, you have your hand up. Do you want to ask the next question?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was just taking some notes as well. Yeah, so thank you, Brandon. You made some great points about local norms, flexible enrollment. I think flexibility in the enrollment, I think you may have alluded to that. I think I've been involved with DC and Place NYC to also have flexible enrollment in like the gifted programs. I think that's important because um, you don't lock in people or prevent people when they're ready for advanced curriculum, and also universal assessment. But I also want to state that some of the discussions around, oh, it's gifted or or advanced. I'll be very honest. What we think is advanced is really not advanced. Over the past 20, 30 years, our standards have actually fallen behind, have gone lower. And what we ask of our students, and I like what you said, Brandon, about giving students more of a challenge. We haven't really challenged our students either through teaching or not. And the other factor is we talk about whether we should have homogeneous or mixed, ability classrooms. Well, the majority of the classrooms in New York City are mixed ability. And we have like what, 40, 50% students who are below proficiency in math and English. I think that really tells you we have a mixed ability environment as default, and it's failed. And it's really important that we do have targeted classrooms for students who are ready. And this is like, we think that, kids in China are super bright. No, because they have different things and they push them more longer school days and so forth, and they offer the more advanced curricula. But that's not like you have super duper kids across the board. No, it's like because the standards are high. Yeah, so I mean, did have a question, but I forgot. what it is. If I do, I don't know if I can chat it or raise my hand later to ask. But I hope
I'll
we do
recognize
this.
you later if we don't run out of
Yeah,
time.
thanks.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I hope you guys do this. I hope it expands. I don't think it's leaving people behind. It's no longer forcing kids who are ready to be left out of the education process because they're bored as hell or it's over their head. That's not equity. Thank you.
Thanks. Lisa, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Allison and Daniela and Brandon for, putting this together tonight. So much of what Brandon said resonated with the geometry class that's happening at Lab Middle right now. And I just wanted to note that this was something that was really grassroots that came from the families in the community. Like I worked on the SLT to help this get off the ground. And so far it's been so successful. Kids are doing really well in it. And my son came to me like a month ago and said, well, what class am I going to do like before school next year? Like that's how much he likes it. And even though, yes, it's like those early mornings are a bit tough, he's already looking forward to trying some other challenge next year as an eighth grader. So who knows, Superintendent McGuire, you may get an email asking for Algebra 2, although I would just like him to get his sleep. But he's really enjoyed it, and the kids really, they've bonded, they have a good experience, and it's really important that they have these successes because that builds their confidence and their self-esteem as well as their skills and their academic learning. I just wanted to ask Superintendent McGuire, oh, and also Brandon, 100% the way that the class was kind of like developed was using the assessments of the iReady data, which all the students are doing internally within the school. So yes, it's like a locally normed and school independent system. So just thinking about how it could be expanded and even more successful for the future, because I was excited when Superintendent McGuire said anticipating 2 or 3 other schools trying this out. Like how can we in District 2 really push the envelope for rigorous math in even upper elementary school, like in 4th and 5th grade? Because as you said, front loading is so important, and that's how you get kids by middle school who are ready for these challenges. So I was just wondering, like, what else can we do in the elementary school level that's really going to support, geometry pilot or other, accelerated options like this?
I mean, well, I will say, I do think that all kids can get out a lot out of a mixed ability classroom. And in the past, just recently, in the past couple of years, many elementary schools in our district have shifted to a curriculum that is aligned with the next generation learning standards. And prior to just a couple of years ago, we were using a curriculum that was not aligned and not fully rigorous in the way that it could be. So that transition is a really important one happening in our district, and I think is going to help to set up more kids for doing more advanced math, both in middle school and in high school. The other thing that's kind of happening simultaneously too is that, more and more schools are building out these intervention or what I need class periods, and we're defining those what I need periods as not just for kids who are not yet working at grade level, but also for kids who are working at or above grade level. And so that also is a new structure that's happening in the school, and it's different than the ways that we've approached, differentiated instruction in the past. It's much, much more serious of an approach to supporting kids at all levels. And so I really think we're just at the very beginning of putting some of these structures in place and also working well with these new curricula that are just pushing kids thinking a whole lot more than the previous curricula that we had.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other further questions this evening for Brandon, for myself, or for the superintendent?
I have one question. Kelly, I think that the schools that are going to be offering this year might help some parents actually make the decision if they stay in the district or not. As some of the parents here already said, when can we expect to know which schools will be able to expand this program that has been so successful at Middle Lab? Do we have a timeline for this?
Yeah, I think that by the middle of May, we will know where it is that we're going to be, like which schools are going to be the home schools. But I do just want to reiterate that even if a smaller school like a 289 or Yorkville East or something like that had students who wanted to participate, that we could figure out a way to make sure that they were included in the program of a Wagner or Lab or Baruch or something like that. So I really think there's going to be access and opportunity for any student who wants to participate to be in. But
That's
I do
terrific.
also think it's important, I mean, I appreciate the kind of concurrent conversation about looking at readiness. I do think that that's an important piece here as well, because not only, is the curriculum, a curriculum that's normally taught in 10th grade, but it's also, it requires a certain amount of enthusiasm and energy for doing the work. So it's important, I think, in this case to make sure that there's, kind of a triple check on making sure that the kids who are joining the class are going to be able to be successful with it.
Agreed. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us, Superintendent McGuire. Thank you, Brandon Wright. Thanks to Daniela and the rest of the committee and the CEC, and to all the parents who came out tonight. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. Liz, did you want to say one final thing?
Yes, one
Go
final
ahead.
thing, as Lisa mentioned, moving from elementary school, I would like to point out what happens on the other end when a student goes to high school. Initiating a program like this may require some of the district high schools to approach students a little more flexibly. If a kid comes out of middle school having taken Algebra 1 and geometry, they will essentially only be lined up to go to specialized high schools. And I know, since I have an 8th grader, a school like Millennium would not let a student come into their school and start as a 9th grader in a more advanced course because of just the nature of their program. So it would be nice to see high schools, besides specialized high schools, able to take in students who are coming out of this program.
We'll make sure we share this with the city council-wide and high schools. We have some colleagues there that we can definitely share that feedback.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. And thank you, everyone. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.